I, the daughter of a respected beta, am now a servant. My worth is not in honor, but in my womb. The alpha of our pack needs an heir, but he refuses a mate. War is imminent. If he falls, our entire pack will be destroyed. I was chosen to carry his bloodline. In the halls of power, I am a nobody, a target of ridicule, surveillance, and exploitation. Everyone says that once his destined Luna awakens, I will be cast aside without a second thought. In a desperate search for a way out, I stumbled into the Forbidden Dungeon, a lawless land ruled by a savage wolf pack. There, amidst the cold stone and primal dominance, I met him. A rogue alpha, a law unto himself, dangerously unpredictable. He showed an unusual interest in who I was. He offered me a hand, a way to escape, but the deadliest traps often come disguised as safety, and in that darkness, he possessed me without even a touch.
Touch me.
The words struggled out of my throat, a trembling, faint plea, barely audible. I hated the sound of my own voice. It was bitter as poison and utterly absurd. He was the last person I should ever crave, yet my body betrayed me. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat louder and faster than the last. My skin pricked with desire, my whole body humming and burning for his touch alone. A slow, wickedly charming, infuriating smirk crept across his face, both chilling me and instantly setting me alight. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, velvety, smooth drawl, edged with mockery.
Careful, my darling seductor Zuel. I'll regret this later, when you are sane.
Chapter 1. The Chosen Breeder. Take off your clothes. My eyes snapped wide open. There were 5 of them in the room, all women, cloaked in robes marked with the Elder Seal, watching me like I was already bare. Their stares weren't cruel, just expectant, detached. As if they'd seen this 100 times before and knew I'd eventually obey. Maybe the ones before me hadn't flinched. Maybe they'd considered it an honor. Most women in the pack would have. To them, this was the moon's favor, a golden spoon offered by fate itself. A chance to bear the alpha's heir, but for me, that golden spoon dripped with poison, and I was expected to swallow it smiling. The people around were all women, but it was still hard for me because I wasn't used to letting people see my naked body. I clenched my jaw, humiliation curled in my gut, making my skin burn even before I moved a muscle. The women surrounding me wore stern faces, practiced in apathy. They were the elders assigned to examine women of low birth for one purpose only, to find a womb suitable for the alpha. "We don't have all day," one of them said flatly. "You were told what this was. Obey." I swallowed hard. My fingers trembled as I reached up to undo the ties of my worn linen dress. My wolf stirred faintly like a flicker of defiance deep inside me, but the silver band clamped around my wrist tightened, burning slightly, a reminder. I couldn't shift even if I wanted to. So I did what was expected of me. I undressed. Time flew fast after that examination. A week dragged on, slow and agonizing. I went about my tasks in the servant quarters in the council house with an aching sense of dread in my chest. And then the letter came. "You were chosen!" My mother, Almira, shrieked with joy, rushing into our corner of the servants' quarters, waving the sealed letter like it was a blessing from the moon goddess herself. I didn't move. She dropped beside me, gripping my shoulders. "Do you know what this means? We will have a home, Vivian, a real one. You won't scrub floors until your bones break anymore. We might even get our name recognized again." But I could only hear the beating of my own heart, because I had hoped foolishly, desperately that I wouldn't be chosen. I thought maybe they would find my wolf too weak, maybe my bloodline too tainted. Maybe they would pick someone else, but no. The daughter of a traitor beta, the girl they all hated, was now the chosen breeder of Alpha Finn Rice. How fucked is that? Did he chose me? It wasn't until I stepped into the stone-cold hallway of the Alpha's main residence that the weight of my fate truly pressed down on me. This was no promotion, it was a cage with velvet drapes. My new quarters were elegant compared to the servant rooms, but it offered no comfort. Even the windows had runes etched into the glass, preventing wolves from shifting near them. A gilded prison. The day he came to see me was the first time I saw him in a while. Finn Rice. Once we had laughed under the moonlight. He had given me my first stolen sweet from the kitchens. I used to follow him around the training yard, wide-eyed, clutching a wooden toy too big for me. He used to ruffle my hair and tease me as a child, but that boy was gone. In his place stood a man with broad shoulders and cold, calculating eyes. the alpha of one of the largest packs in the continent, the Levian pack. The one destined to mate with the celestial wolf should she ever awaken from her enchanted sleep. He stepped into my room, his presence filling the space before he even spoke. I stood slowly, trying to calm my breathing. Why me? Why would you choose the daughter of a person who betrayed your pack? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. My eyes locked onto his, searching for any flicker of the boy I once knew. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Finn stood tall, dominant, radiating the kind of power that made my lungs tighten. Why not? He said with a shrug, lips curling into a cruel smirk. It's not like you are chosen to be my mate and Luna. You are chosen to be a breeder. Don't feel any special. The words hit harder than any slap. So that's it then. You want to insult me and my family further? I snapped before I could stop myself. His hand moved in a flash. He gripped my jaw, fingers digging into my skin. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate. You should be honored to mother your alpha's child, woman. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out, because if there was one thing I knew, it was that tears only made them enjoy it more. So I stood there, silent, burning, but not broken. Not yet. Chapter 2. Into the Shadows. 3 years ago,
my father was executed by the Alpha's orders. They said he tried to lead a rebellion against the Alpha, that he was gathering men in secret, plotting to overthrow Alpha Finn. There was no trial, no anything.
Just an announcement of treason, a sentence by the council, and the heavy swing of a blade I never got to see but heard. The echo of steel meeting flesh still finds me in my sleep. I had watched from behind a wall, my mother clutching my arm, nails digging into skin. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared, like something in her soul had cracked and drained out. After that, our lives collapsed. From a family of influence and honor, we were reduced to nameless ghosts. The council seized our land, our titles were revoked. My mother and I were moved into the council's servant quarters and assigned menial work, cleaning, laundry, errands. We were warned not to speak about the past, and we didn't. What would have been the point? Now I'm here, in the Alpha's residence, not as a guest, not even as a servant, as something worse, the breeder. I was summoned that morning by the head servant, a tall, sharp-eyed man with gray in his beard and the posture of a soldier. His name was Master Roldan, and he greeted me with a cold nod as if we were merely discussing a shift schedule. Vivienne Maliore, he said.
You will undergo the airbend rite on the night of the full moon, 15 days from today. I said nothing. He continued. The rite is sacred. You will be cleansed, prepared, and blessed by the High Matron so that your body will be ready to conceive the Alpha's heir. You are not to resist or question any part of it. After the rite, the Alpha may summon you for the night. My throat was dry. Are we clear? I nodded just once. He then gave me the rules, 4 of them spoken like commands etched in stone. First, I am not allowed to leave the residence without permission.
Second, I am forbidden from entering the West Wing where the Alpha's private quarters are located unless summoned. Third, I must not, under any circumstance, harm myself, especially once I conceive. If I did, consequences would be severe. Fourth, I must obey every order given by the Alpha. Any defiance, he said, will result in punishment. I didn't show any defiance, though I wanted to scream. When I was back in my room, I did nothing but stare at the walls. I didn't want to live this life. But if I won't obey, I'd risk my mother's life and mine. I actually don't care about mine. But I can't cause my mother's death. I couldn't take another death of a family. I lost track of time and only realized it was afternoon when a maid entered my room holding a tray of folded linens and oils. She looked to be around my age, perhaps a year older, with warm brown eyes and a braid that looped over one shoulder. She wore the standard servant dress, but it didn't dampen her light. You must be Miss Vivian, she said with a soft smile. Just Vivian, please, I said quietly. I'm Stella. I'm assigned to assist you with anything you need, she continued. Bathing, meals, errands. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask me. I found myself nodding. I found it odd that I got some helping hand now after 3 years of being a servant. Stella's presence was gentle, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt the knot in my chest loosen slightly. That evening, as she helped me into the bath, I let the warm water soak my skin while she poured a mixture of herbs and salts around me. Is something happening tonight? I asked, noticing the air carried the faint smell of roasting meat and wine. Stella brightened. Yes, there's a gathering in the ballroom, nobles, businessmen, and the other high families will attend. The Alpha's hosting it in honor of the recently won war in the West. Am I supposed to join? No, I asked. Even though I already knew the answer, Stella shook her head gently. I'm afraid not. You're to remain in your quarters during events like this. Of course. I sank deeper into the bathwater, watching the candlelight flicker against the marble walls. Night fell. I curled up in the window seat of my room with an old book, some worn-out collection of moon poems and outdated customs. It did little to distract me from the laughter echoing through the halls, the clinking of glasses, the swell of music, shoes tapping against ballroom floors. I remembered a time when I used to attend such parties. My mother would dress me in flowing gowns. My father would beam with pride as we entered the ballroom together. I remember the weight of pearls around my neck, the warmth of wine, the joy of dancing. Now I sat hidden in a gilded cage meant only to be used. I tried to sleep, but the silence in my room felt louder than the music outside. I turned in bed, stared at the ceiling,
and counted every breath until boredom and restlessness gnawed through my resolve. I rose quietly in my long white nightdress. It was soft cotton, lightweight and plain, but it hugged my waist gently and flowed around my legs with every step. I left my feet bare. My auburn hair fell in soft mermaid curls down to my waist.
I didn't bother pinning it up. Stella had casually mentioned a small back door that led to the garden. It didn't offer an escape, of course. There were guards at the gates, which made escape impossible. But it offered a view of the moon in the garden, which made it useful enough for me. I stepped out into the hallway. The golden sconces along the walls glowed low, casting long shadows. The hall was mostly quiet now, with the celebration moving further inside. I tiptoed my way down, avoiding creaking panels and lit spaces until I reached the door. It opened with a soft click. The night air rushed in, cool and clean. I stepped out into the garden. The grass was damp beneath my feet. The scent of jasmine and night bloom flowers surrounded me. Moonlight spilled across the stone path, making everything silver. The garden stretched wide, trees lining the edges like quiet sentinels. A small fountain gurgled softly nearby. I walked slowly, breathing in the silence. A breeze lifted the ends of my dress, carrying strands of my hair into the air like ribbons. Suddenly, something felt strange. I stopped. Someone was watching me. Chapter 3: A Signal of Danger. The moment the breeze shifted, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, not exactly, but a chill crawled up the back of my neck like a whisper of a presence I couldn't see. Someone was watching me. I felt it deep in my gut, the way animals know a storm is coming. I turned my head slowly, pretending to admire the glowing white lilies planted near the fountain. But my heart was pounding, too fast, too loud. Without another thought, I slipped away from the stone path and moved toward the deeper part of the garden. Past the shrubs, the carefully planted rows of silver roses, and toward the maze, a quiet place no one really bothered with. Not during parties. It was too dark, too easy to get lost in. I didn't go far, just enough to slip behind the hedges and hide my body from view. The entrance alone was thick enough with flowers and tall enough to shield me. I crouched behind a wall of ivy, holding my breath, trying to listen. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing. Only the music playing faintly in the distance and the chirp of crickets in the underbrush. I let out a slow breath. Maybe I imagined it. The last thing I wanted was to be seen like this. Outside my room during a gathering filled with high-ranking wolves and guests from all over. If someone from the pack saw me. If they told Finn. I started to step back out of the hedge when a voice stopped me cold. Are you looking for me? My entire body jolted. I spun around so fast I nearly stumbled. There. Just a few paces away stood a man partially hidden in the dark edge of the hedges. His arms were crossed, and a silver mask covered most of his face, catching silvers of moonlight between the leaves. A guest? My first thought was that it must be a masquerade party theme. That would explain the mask. The man had a great build and was tall, taller than Finn. His shoulders were broad, his stance relaxed, but commanding, like someone who didn't need to prove anything. He looked like he could be a beta or even an alpha, but I noticed his scent barely lingered. Faint. Not at all like what I'd expect from a wolf of high rank. Most powerful wolf shifters had a distinct scent that hit you before they even spoke, thick, earthy, wild. This one was barely there, like a phantom.
Books and the pack elders have always said that the weaker the scent of a shifter, the weaker the wolf he has. Beneath his mask were eyes that glinted through the dark. They were sea green, sharp, watching me like I was some kind of puzzle. "It is very convenient," he said, "for a prisoner to escape on the night of a party, don't you think?" My breath caught. His words sank in slowly, and I snapped out of my thoughts. I'm not, I started, then faltered. Was I not? "I'm not escaping," I said instead, softer this time. He didn't move, didn't even blink. "You have sharp senses," he said.
Voice like a blade wrapped in silk. "You sensed I was watching. Not many can feel that, but you don't have your wolf yet, which I find strange. You seem old enough to have one." My hands curled into my skirt. He was right about my senses. My father was a beta, strong and reliable. He taught me a few things, but the stranger was wrong about my wolf. I had her. I was accompanied by her just before they locked her away. After my father's betrayal, the alpha stripped us of everything. My mother and I were bound with the wolf bind, bands carved with the ritual markings of the cursed seal. We couldn't shift, couldn't connect, couldn't even smell like full wolves. It was the same thing they used on criminals and families of criminals. I swallowed hard and forced my voice steady. "I see that you're a guest. You should return to the hall, sir." He didn't reply right away. His eyes narrowed just slightly, like he was trying to read between the lines of what I didn't say. I kept my face neutral. Don't provoke, don't react. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, who was he? The way he spoke wasn't like the others I'd seen. His voice was too smooth, his words too deliberate, as though everything he said had been carefully chosen, and those eyes, piercing, sea glass sharp, not a single flicker of drunken amusement or idle curiosity. "So you want me to leave you alone now, after distracting me?" His tone shifted, playful on the surface, but laced with something colder beneath. The kind of tone that made my blood chill, even though he hadn't moved a step. What? My breath caught. What did he mean by that? I stared at him, confused, wary. I didn't understand. Distracting? "Aren't you here to distract me on purpose?" he asked, his voice twisting into a scoff as though he'd already decided the answer. "Did your alpha know I came?" My eyes widened. When he said "your alpha," it sounded like a warning, like Finn shouldn't know anything at all, which meant this stranger wasn't invited. Who was this man? I opened my mouth, forcing the words out. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know you." "Really?" His gaze was razor sharp now, then his eyes slid over me, slowly, from head to toe, not lasciviously, but as though he was measuring me. "I don't think you're a prisoner," he said at last. "You just bathed. I can smell your flowery soap all over you, scented with rose and lavender. That nightdress?" He tilted his head. "Quite a good quality fabric, not what a servant wears to sleep." My heart sank. "You knew someone was watching you," he continued. "You didn't go back inside, didn't look for help, didn't even go close to the guards. Instead, you came here to the shadows. You led whoever it was away from people, which means there's a good chance you wanted me to follow you." He wasn't accusing me like someone unhinged. He was breaking down my every move like a strategist. Calculated, it terrified me more than shouting would have. I took a step back, barely able to find my voice. I didn't expect this conversation to go this way. He took a step forward. I tried not to react, but my instincts screamed at me to run. My wolf stirred faintly inside me, muffled by the wolf band on my wrist. "You're intimidating me," I whispered. "Why?" His sea green eyes didn't waver. "Why would you lure me here then?" "I didn't," I said, and I meant it. "Why would I even do that?" His voice dropped. "Because you've discovered my identity? Who knows?" I frowned. "I haven't discovered anything." "You seem distrustful," I added, more softly now. "Your life must have been hard, but accusing people like this, that's not—" "Don't sweet talk me," he snapped, cutting me off. "You think I don't kill cute girls?" My breath caught. He didn't shout it. He didn't snarl, but his words made me shiver, and I realized then that I had no idea who I was talking to. This man could be dangerous in a way that I couldn't fathom. If you really want to kill me, I gritted my teeth, then do it. I wouldn't mind. Maybe I was better off dead. He didn't answer. Instead, he watched me with a stillness that made my skin crawl, like a storm deciding whether or not to strike. The silence between us stretched. Then, finally, he spoke. Tell me, what's your name? I hesitated. That pause, brief as it was, seemed to amuse him. A corner of his mouth twitched. Like he already knew I wouldn't answer, I parted my lips. But before I could speak, the sound of a loud howl ripped through the garden. I froze. That wasn't just any howl. It was sharp, piercing. There was no mistaking it. It came from the messenger of East Hill Tower, a signal of danger. Chapter 4, Rogues of Undercity. I ran away and fought the urge to look back, fearing that if I looked back, I'd find the stranger running after me. Even as my skin prickled with the weight of his gaze, hot and heavy between my shoulder blades, I didn't dare glance over my shoulder. My feet pounded across the garden path as I ran, heart hammering, dress tangled around my legs. Leaves scraped against my arms as I pushed past the hedges and rose bushes, breath catching in my throat. The stranger stayed behind, but the chill he left in my bones ran with me all the way to the back doors of the residence. What was that howl? What did the East Hill Tower signal mean? Were there intruders? My thoughts spiraled, a whirlwind of panic as I slipped into the quiet halls. The music of the party was gone now, replaced by eerie silence. The laughter was gone. Just a heavy stillness that seemed to cling to the walls. I didn't stop. I rushed through the dim corridors and climbed the stairs, taking them two at a time until I reached the familiar hall that led to my room. My fingers shook as I pushed open the door. Safe. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and finally let myself collapse. My knees hit the floor beside the bed, the cold wooden boards grounding me for the first time tonight. I pressed my palms against them and tried to breathe. The door creaked open and I jumped. Miss Vivian. Stella's soft voice filled the room a second before her small form slipped inside. She held a mug in both hands, steam curling from it. There you are, she gasped, relief flooding her face. I came by to give you warm milk before bed, but you weren't here. I was worried something happened. She shut the door behind her and stepped closer, crouching beside me. Are you hurt? What happened? You're so pale. I shook my head quickly. I'm fine. I just needed air. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Stella looked at me with that sweet, worried expression of hers. I couldn't tell her about the masked man, not when I didn't even understand who he was. Is everything all right in the ballroom? I asked instead. She hesitated. That told me enough. Stella? I pressed. She looked down, then shook her head. Why was there a signal from the East Hill Tower? I asked, my voice lower now, tighter. I overheard some of the guards talking in the kitchen. She kept her tone hushed, like saying the words too loud might make them worse. There are intruders in town, rogues from the Undercity. I stared at her. The words didn't sink in at first. The Undercity? You're sure? I whispered. She nodded. That's what they said. The Undercity. I'd only ever heard of it in whispers. An underground territory carved out in the forgotten parts of the northern region. A vast shadowed place where no laws existed. A place for banished wolves, criminals, rebels. They didn't live by the rules of the Unified Alliance, didn't believe in order or peace.
And they were feared for a reason, Stella said. I should let you rest. The Alpha will take care of things, so you shouldn't worry. We are safe here. Please try to sleep, Miss Vivian. I nodded, but I didn't move until she was gone. Only when the door closed behind her did I stand and walk toward the window. The moonlight poured over the garden below as I saw warriors shifting in the ground. They didn't pause. The moment their paws hit the grass, they bolted toward the shadows. They were moving fast. I placed a hand on the glass, my thoughts racing again.
Chaos had been spreading across the continent for years now. Trouble wasn't caused solely by Undercity, though, because even without their involvement, rogue wolves popped up in every direction. Small packs trying to take territory, assassinate leaders, ignite unrest. They were rebels, outlaws. The Unified Alliance had fought hard to suppress them, but the cracks were showing. The Unified Alliance was the system that bound all the civilized packs together. It was built on rules, bloodlines, and strength, but not everyone agreed with how they governed. Not everyone wanted peace. The chaos was growing. It was the reason why our pack's council pushed Finn to have an heir. I remembered the council's voices in the council house where I used to be a servant. If anything happens to the alpha's line must continue. We cannot risk leaving the pack leaderless. That's why they pushed for an heir. Finn didn't want to take a mate yet. He had been waiting for the celestial wolf to awaken a divine she-wolf sleeping in the undersea tower. And the best solution? Find a breeder. I wasn't chosen because I was strong or special. I was chosen because I was disposable. As I stood at the window watching the last of the warriors disappear into the trees, I began to worry about my mother. She was living in the town now. The Levian Council had granted her a house when I was chosen as the breeder. An act of compensation, they'd called it. A gesture to honor the bond between Alpha and lineage or some noble-sounding excuse. But I know they didn't give her that house out of kindness. They gave it to fulfill some archaic rule tucked away in the pack's breeding protocols. To make it look like I had been given something in return for being used. Morning came with gray light and a hollow kind of quiet. I hadn't slept much, only drifted in and out of uneasy dreams filled with silver masks and howls that never stopped. When I finally sat up, my heart still felt heavy in my chest. A soft knock came at the door before Stella entered, balancing a tray of food and warm tea. "Good morning, Miss Vivian," she said gently, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "Morning," I mumbled. She gave me a hopeful look. "I brought your breakfast, mulberry jam and honeyed toast." I managed a small smile and took the cup of tea first. "Stella, do you know anything new about last night?" She paused while smoothing the wrinkles from the blanket. "The guards are talking again. I overheard them say that by the time our warriors arrived in the town, the rogues were gone. There were no casualties, fortunately. No one was harmed." My shoulders slumped in relief. I hadn't realized how tight my chest had been until that moment. No bloodshed, and my mother was safe. "Thank the goddess," I whispered. But after a few seconds, my brows furrowed. What did the rogues do then? They are from Undercity. They must have done something. "I don't know much. Most maids don't know anything as well. All we hear are bits and pieces from the guards' idle chatter." Her words faded into the background as another thought crept in. The masked stranger from last night, his voice smooth but sharp, his accusing eyes, the way he asked if I'd lured him on purpose, if Finn was aware of his presence. He knew Finn. That much was clear, and yet it seemed he didn't want Finn to know he was here. It makes me think that he wasn't supposed to be present in the party at all. Could his appearance be connected to the rogues from the Undercity? Chapter 5, Summoned. After breakfast, Stella began combing through my hair with gentle fingers, her touch as soothing as the tea I hadn't finished. The brush moved through the tangles, lulling my mind into stillness until a sharp knock came at the door. A maid stood in the doorway, her face stiff with formality. "The Alpha has summoned you to the study room, breeder." I blinked, setting down my cup. "Now?" She nodded once. Stella began to rise, already smoothing her apron as if she meant to accompany me. But before she could take a step, the maid cut in. "She must go alone." Stella's lips pressed into a thin line, her hand still on the edge of my chair. I gave her a small nod, giving her reassurance even if I didn't feel it, and I stood. The corridors were quieter than usual. As I walked behind the maid, I kept my eyes ahead,
though I could feel the weight of every step echoing through the hall. The Rice estate was a grand structure, heavy with history and wealth. Portraits lined the walls, proud alphas and their stone-faced lunas, all dressed in gold-trimmed ceremonial garb. Their painted eyes followed me, as if silently questioning my presence in their territory. Gold, gold, and more gold. It coated the moldings, framed the doors, shimmered in the chandeliers. Even the floor tiles had gold veins running through them. The Rice family never missed a chance to remind everyone of their legacy, of their power.
We stopped outside the study doors. The maid opened them without a word and gestured for me to enter. She didn't follow. I stepped in, hesitating for a moment as the door closed softly behind me. The study was quiet, bookshelves lined the walls, and the scent of leather and old papers filled the air. I couldn't see who was inside at first. The tall shelf by the door blocked most of the room. My heart pounded. Was this about last night? Had Finn somehow found out I'd left my room? I drew a breath and forced myself forward. Slowly, I stepped past the shelf and froze. It wasn't Finn waiting for me. A woman stood near the desk, her back to me, watching the window as if the outside world might offer something more interesting than my presence, but I recognized her instantly. Her rich brown hair was neatly combed and pinned in a style that spoke of elegance without effort. Her posture, straight, graceful, completely at ease, could have been carved from marble. Then she turned. "Here you are," Esther said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Wicked, that was the only word I could think of to describe the expression curving across her lips. It was the same smile she wore ever since we were children. "You look paler than usual," she added smoothly. "Must be the cold air in your room, or perhaps the lack of attention from the alpha?" She let out a soft chuckle like it was the cleverest thing she'd said all week. I didn't rise to it. I couldn't afford to. Maybe I could, back when I had the same status as her, but I no longer could. "What do you need from me, Esther?" I asked, carefully keeping my voice even. My fingers curled at my sides, but I didn't let the anger show. She wanted a reaction. That was the game. She'd won it before with other girls, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Esther took a step closer, her eyes sparkling with something cruel. She was the daughter of the chief beta, an admired figure in the pack, beautiful, confident, respected. If it weren't for the celestial wolf, everyone would assume she'd be Luna by now, but she wasn't, because Finn had always been clear he would wait for the celestial wolf. Which meant Esther, despite everything she was, had to watch as I, the girl reduced to Omega, was given a place in his legacy before she was. She hated me for that. And in moments like this, I almost hated myself for letting it happen. Esther moved closer, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood floor as she circled me like a wolf toying with an injured prey. "Don't think that Finn chose you because you're likable," she said, voice low and venomous. "He chose you because you're worthless. Because you're easy to discard." She stopped in front of me, lips curling with disdain. "You have no place anywhere near him." I looked at her. Her beauty was undeniable, her bloodline impeccable. She was everything the pack admired, refined, high-ranking, destined for more. And yet here she was, standing in front of me, spitting words like poison over someone she claimed to have no competition with. "If you know that," I said calmly, "then why do you seem so mad?" Her eyes narrowed. "Why are you wasting your time saying this to me?" I added, unable to keep the edge from my voice. It was obvious Esther, despite all her confidence, was insecure. She had reason to be. If her father weren't the chief beta, she would have offered herself to bear Finn's child in a heartbeat. She would have done it without question, without hesitation, but her father would never allow such a disgrace. To carry a child without the title of Luna, to become a breeder, that would be humiliation. Esther's father only tolerated her relationship with Finn because the celestial wolf, the one he truly wanted, hadn't awakened yet. Esther was a placeholder, a temporary comfort. A body in his bed, not a name in his bloodline. She knew that, and it killed her. "If there's nothing else," I said, keeping my voice level, "I'll go now." I turned, intending to leave this room and everything suffocating inside it behind me. But her voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Don't you dare turn your back on me, Omega." I froze. My jaw clenched, but I stayed rooted where I stood. A beat of silence, then footsteps. And then pain flared across my cheek as her hand struck me. My head snapped to the side, hair whipping across my face. "You think you can disrespect me just because you're being cared for under this roof?" Esther hissed. "You think you matter now." My hands balled into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. My body trembled, not just from the sting of the slap, but from the effort it took not to respond. "I am Finn's lover," she said coldly, her breath brushing my skin. "And you're just a breeder. You're here to serve. Nothing more?" "I am to serve the alpha," I whispered. "Not you." The second slap came harder. I stumbled backward from the force of it, catching myself just before I lost my footing. But it wasn't enough for her. She stepped forward and shoved me. My legs gave out and I hit the cold floor, my hands breaking the fall. I looked up, blinking through the blur of tears forming in my eyes, and Esther smiled. A slow, victorious smile. "Go on," she taunted. "Hit me, scratch me, say something cruel, hurt me back." She leaned down, her voice a mockery of sweetness. Let's see what kind of punishment you'll suffer in the alpha's hands. Tears stung my eyes, not just from pain, but from the unfairness of it all. I had the urge to scream, to claw her perfect face, to remind her that cruelty didn't make her powerful, it made her small, but I bit my tongue, because I knew how this worked. She was the admired daughter of the chief beta, and me, I was the powerless one. Chapter 6, Don't Feed Your Curiosity. The cold cloth pressed gently against my cheek, but the sting beneath it remained. Stella held the compress with shaking hands, her brows furrowed with quiet fury. You will carry the alpha's heir, she muttered. She shouldn't be hurting you. When I returned to my room earlier, she was waiting for me. When she saw the bruise on my cheek, she was shocked and thought Finn hurt me. I told her someone else did. I sat still, trying not to flinch as the chill seeped into my skin. The bruise was already swelling. I could feel the ache blooming under the pressure. But she can, I whispered back. Stella tisked under her breath. That Esther, she acts like she's the Luna when she will never be. It's not right. I gave her a small, tired smile. I don't think she'll do anything foolish once I conceive. She wouldn't dare risk harming the alpha's child. That, at least, I believed. Esther might hate me, but her pride wouldn't survive the backlash of hurting the alpha's heir. Once the baby existed, it would be untouchable, even by her. We sat in silence for a while, Stella dabbing at my bruise and me staring blankly at the wall. A helpless sigh passed between us. I wasn't sure when I fell asleep that night. One moment I was staring at the ceiling, the cool compress long since removed, and the next I was opening my eyes to darkness, but something felt off. The room around me was quiet, the air chilled. I blinked and sat up slowly, rubbing my arms. At first, I assumed I was still in the alpha's estate. My room there was always dim before dawn, but as I looked around, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the alpha's residence, this was my room, my old room. I stared, stunned, as the soft outlines of familiar furniture came into focus, the nightstand my father bought from another city for my 13th birthday, the old shelf where my mother used to keep dried lavender, even the old storybooks in my small shelf I always kept as a child. This place was supposed to be gone, seized, destroyed, reduced to nothing but rubble by the council, yet here it was. Whole, untouched, and cold. A breeze crept through the open windows, sharp against my skin. The sheer beige curtains fluttered in the moonlight. I stood, barefoot against old wooden floorboards, and wrapped my arms around myself. The air shouldn't have felt this cold, shouldn't feel this real. Dreams were never so vivid you could almost taste the air.
And yet every step I took felt heavy with memory. Even the smell, dried flowers and the faint tinge of dust, was achingly familiar. I took a cautious step toward the windows, drawn by the chill and the strange stillness that hung over the room. But then I felt it. A shift in the air, a subtle, unshakable certainty that I wasn't alone. The sensation crawled up my spine like ice water. I stopped moving, my breath hitched. My eyes scanned the corners, the space near the dresser, the shadows that clung too tightly to the walls. Something or someone was watching me. I spun around. Who's there?
Oh, I called out, my voice a fragile echo in the stillness. Show yourself to me. Nothing, just the whisper of wind and the rustle of curtain fabric, and then something brushed against my face, soft, almost gentle. A cloth slid over my eyes. I gasped and reached up, instinctively trying to pull it off, but before I could, a smooth, invisible force seized my wrists and dragged them behind my back. Silken restraints, cold and yet smooth, bound my hands tightly. Panic bloomed in my chest. What is this? I breathed, struggling. What's happening? No answer. I twisted, tugged,
tried to shout myself awake. My usual trick to jolt free from a dream, but this dream didn't obey me. I couldn't move, I couldn't wake. My body remained rooted in place, the cloth pressing into my face, the ties cutting softly into my skin. And then I felt him. The presence. It was like gravity shifted. The air grew denser, the temperature dropped further, but the space behind me grew inexplicably warm. I felt him before he even spoke, before he moved tall, still, and far too close, closer. The weight of his attention coiled around me like smoke, suffocating and unseen. He didn't touch me, but every inch of my body knew he was there. He exhaled near my ear,
Don't feed your curiosity, he murmured, the voice deep and cool with a calm that bordered on dangerous. Curiosity can lure you to a trap. My breath caught. The voice somehow sounded familiar, not well enough to name, but enough to freeze my blood. It was familiar in a way I couldn't explain, but at the same time very foreign. My mind raced, trying to place it, but I couldn't get close. Instead, it slipped further from reach. Who are you? I whispered again, this time more desperate than demanding. Silence answered me. The presence lingered behind me, unmoving and unreadable, and I was beginning to wonder if I was dreaming at all. You're in my dream, I said, my voice trembling against the silence. I ought to know who the stranger is, visiting me. The cloth still covered my eyes, plunging me into blackness, but I could sense his every move. He was in front of me now, inches away, too close. My breath caught when the scent of him hit me, deep and primal, the unmistakable scent of a strong wolf. There was something raw and powerful about it, yet not overwhelming. It wasn't like Finn's. This one was darker, warmer, wild, and commanding in a way that made every hair on my body stand on end. I never remembered a time when my senses had been so sharp in my dream, just with this one. I could feel the texture of the air against my skin, the tension humming in my spine, the scent of him threading through my lungs like smoke. You don't have to know me right now, he murmured, his voice quieter now, almost gentle but no less unsettling. Chapter 7, he was gone. I felt him lean closer. A moment later, his fingers brushed against my shoulder, tucking a strand of hair back, letting it trail along the curve of my neck. I gasped when I felt the warm press of his breath against my skin. My body reacted before my mind did. I instinctively took a step back, only to freeze when his hand found the small of my back. He didn't push, he didn't pull, but the weight of his palm burned through the thin fabric of my nightdress like heat, grounding me, shaking me. I hated that it made me feel safe. I hated even more that it made me want more. Don't touch me, I said, but the words escaped too soft, too breathy. It didn't sound like a warning. Instead, it sounded more like an invitation, he chuckled. A deep velvet sound that slid down my spine. Your heart is racing, he said smoothly, and I can smell your desire. His voice dipped lower. You want my touch. You shouldn't deny it.
No, I whispered, but the word felt hollow even to me. I cursed myself for it. No, he echoed, almost amused. His hand, still resting lightly on my back, began to move. Slow, purposeful. His fingers trailed upward, sliding over the fabric of my nightdress, brushing the bare skin of my upper back where it dipped low. I sucked in a breath. His touch wasn't aggressive, it wasn't forceful, but it stripped away every illusion of safety. Not because I feared him, but because I feared myself. Why would you say no? He whispered. This is only a dream. His fingers reached the nape of my neck. There's nothing wrong with indulging yourself a little. Indulging. The word curled in the dark like temptation itself. I shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of everything unsaid. The heat of his hand. The way my body betrayed me with every rapid beat of my heart. Oh, right, this wasn't real. It was all a dream, just a strange, vivid, far too intimate illusion, stitched together by my exhausted, lonely mind. This man, whoever he was, wasn't real. He was just a figment. A shadow pulled from the depths of my longing, my confusion. Maybe even my hunger for something more than this caged life I was trapped in, but there's something about him that made me want to cling to this dream, made me want to stay trapped in it. I woke with a gasp. My chest rose and fell in rapid breaths, the fabric of my nightdress clinging to my damp skin. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. I could still feel the ghost of him, his breath against my neck, his fingers trailing up my back, the low hum of his voice. But he was gone. The room around me was cold and still, and the dream, so vivid just moments ago,
was already slipping from my grasp. I blinked slowly, my vision adjusting to the faint moonlight bleeding through the windows. Familiar shadows settled into their rightful places, revealing the corners of the room in Alpha Finn's residence. Not my room in my family's house. Not the warm illusion of memory. I sat up, wrapping my arms around myself. My hands were freezing. I rubbed them against my arms, seeking comfort that didn't come. When I closed my eyes again, I could still remember the warmth. His warmth. I was scared and confused in my dream, but a part of me was disappointed I had woken before I could feel more of him. Morning arrived with a pale sun and a knock at the door. I expected Stella to enter with the usual tray of food and warm tea, but instead she stepped in with a strange look on her face. "Alpha Finn has requested for you to join him for breakfast," she said gently. I sat up, brushing my hair back from my face. "In the dining hall?" "In the garden," she replied. "I'll help you get ready." A short while later, I stepped outside with her, and the early light greeted us with a breeze that tugged at the soft ends of my dress. The garden behind the residence was quiet, trimmed to perfection like everything else in the estate. At the far end stood a long table set for two, overflowing with food I had no appetite for. Finn sat at the head of it, dressed in his usual dark clothes. His dark brown hair was combed back, his posture was rigid, his face unreadable. I took my seat in silence, keeping my gaze low as I reached for the utensils. I hadn't seen him up close in days, and I wasn't sure if I was supposed to speak first. He didn't touch his food, just watch me. "It seems you didn't sleep well," he said, breaking the silence. His tone was clipped and cold, like an accusation rather than concern. I paused, then slowly nodded. "No, I didn't." "Remember," he said, his voice sharpening slightly, "it's your duty to take care of that body. Until you conceive my child, your health, your condition, is not just yours anymore." I swallowed hard, the food in my mouth suddenly turning heavy and tasteless. "Your body is a property of the Alpha," he continued without blinking, "of the pack. Everything you are belongs to something greater now. Don't forget that." I couldn't swallow properly anymore. The food sat untouched on my plate, and even the scent of fresh bread and roasted meat did nothing to stir my appetite. My jaw clenched. My throat felt tight. The words Finn had just spoken played over and over in my head like a cruel reminder of my fate. I bit the inside of my cheek to stop myself from reacting. I refused to look up, afraid he'd see the fury tightening my eyes. I focused on the food in front of me and gave a small nod, voice even. "Give it a few days, Alpha," I said, steady but hollow. "I'll be able to sleep better. It's just homesickness." There was a pause, then he asked, "What's that?" I blinked. I raised my eyes to meet his, unsure if I'd heard him right. "What do you mean?" But he wasn't looking at me the way he normally did. His gaze was trained on the left side of my face. "Let me see the other side of your cheek," he said. It took a second before I realized what he was referring to. The bruise. I thought it had faded enough to go unnoticed, or maybe I just didn't expect him to notice at all. He leaned forward slightly, brows narrowing. "Don't tell me you bumped your face on something because of your clumsiness." His voice dropped, sharper now. "Answer me, breeder." Breeder. I hated that word with passion. The way he uttered it made it even worse. He was very much disgusted, and yet I couldn't understand why he chose me to be his breeder when I disgusted him so much. I guess it's just to spite me, to push me more to submission. I grit my teeth, rage simmering beneath my skin. My throat burned, not from fear, but from memory. Once, long ago, he used to call me sweetly by my name. I could still remember how his voice sounded when we were young, when we'd play in the fields, when he'd grin and tug at my braid just to tease me. Before he changed. Before I became someone beneath him. And stupidly, so stupidly, I adored him back then. The ache of that old foolishness made me sick. Chapter 8. The Crow people drift apart eventually. That's what happened between me and Finn. We were good friends as children, despite a few years of age gap. I even thought he might have liked me more than that until we grew older. Everything changed after his 15th birthday. He trained harder, spent most of his time with the warriors, the elders, the teachers. The boy I once knew disappeared into someone shaped by duty. By 22, he became Alpha. A year later, he had my father executed. Trained well indeed, I know treason is a grave offense. But I expected some mercy because of our shared past, because he was close to my family, because he knew me. But he didn't show any. I wanted to applaud his integrity truly, but how could I? It was my family, my father, my life, and after everything, he treated me like I was nothing, like trash, not even worthy of basic decency. "Why aren't you answering?" Finn's voice cut cold and sharp. "Did someone hurt you?" His eyes darkened. "Your Alpha is asking you a question you're expected to answer, Omega." Of course. I could never escape trouble for long. "Esther came yesterday," I said. That was all he needed. The flicker in his gaze told me he understood. Just hearing her name, his lover with some loose screws on her head, was enough for him to piece it together. He knew what she was like. He always knew. What did you do to provoke her? There it was. I wanted to scoff. Instead, a bitter smile flickered on my lips, which only lasted for a split second. If you just stayed hidden and avoided her, he snapped, you wouldn't have had to suffer. As if it was my fault. As if hiding like a rat was the only way to survive. She asked for me in your name, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, and with my status, do I even have the right to refuse a beta's daughter? She would have found me either way. She hated me for being chosen. If only she knew. I'd trade places with her in a heartbeat. Anything to be rid of this life. Anything to never be tied to Finn. Then don't provoke her, he shouted. My heart jolted at the sudden rise in his voice. A few nearby servants peeked out, only to retreat the moment they saw Finn's expression. I sucked in a shaky breath. I don't have to do anything to provoke her, Alpha. My existence alone is enough. Finn didn't reply. His jaw tensed, but his eyes gave nothing away. I don't remember ever seeing him being affectionate with Esther. I've seen them together plenty of times at ceremonies,
training fields, dinners, but Finn always seemed cold, distant, like she was someone he tolerated, not someone he loved. Sometimes I wondered if he truly felt anything for her at all, or if she was just a placeholder, company to warm the space beside him until his real mate arrived. The conversation didn't end well. He left abruptly, silently. And I couldn't eat another bite. I just went back to my room, empty in more ways than one. Days passed. He didn't ask for me, not that I wanted him to. And thankfully Esther didn't show up again either, but the silence wasn't comforting. It felt more like the calm before a storm. The airbend rite was 5 days away, just 5. 5 days until my fate would be sealed. I tried not to think about it, but how could I not? Deep down, a quiet ache bloomed. I didn't want to mother a child who wouldn't see me as a mother. I didn't want to offer my body to someone I didn't love, and who would never love me back. In my darker thoughts, I imagined slipping away, running far from the pack's reach, far from his control. I imagined a different life. One where I was free, a life painted in soft pastels instead of cruelty and duty. One where I could breathe without fear, but dreams are dangerous when you have no power, and I had none. As I sat on the narrow balcony of my room, staring out at the vast Alpha estate, I watched the sunlight spill over the flower beds. Afternoon gold stretched across the garden, glazing everything in a warm blanket. Then something flickered in my peripheral vision, a shadow that didn't belong. A crow landed on the concrete banister, its feathers glossy black against the light. "It's you again," I murmured. I'd seen the bird nearly every day this past week. It visited my window, trailed me during garden walks, perched nearby when I sat here. Quiet, watchful. Companion or spy, I couldn't tell. "I don't have any nuts today," I added, half amused. "I'll tell Stella to bring some tomorrow." I'd been feeding it bits of almonds and cashews. It always ate delicately, like it understood the gesture. But today, something was different. My eyes drifted to its leg and froze. There was something tied around it. Is that paper? I stood slowly, heart beating faster than I liked. When I looked closely, I realized a small rolled paper was tied to its leg. Is that a message for me? The crow moved its head as if it's nodding. My lips parted. No, there's no way it understood me. Anyway, I was too curious about the rolled paper to mind that, so I crouched to pull it out from the tie on the crow's leg. It didn't even move an inch away, letting me do what I wanted. I got more suspicious. I unrolled the paper. Neat handwriting, clean. A little too elegant for a casual note. You should run while you still can. Want some help? Chapter 9, Bile in Her Throat. What did I just read? No name, no signature. I flipped the paper over. It was blank. Was someone playing games with me? Or was there really someone out there willing to help me? But that couldn't be. The whole pack hated me. No one would dare cross Finn. Not for me, at least. This had to be a trap. Maybe it was Esther. Maybe she couldn't stand the idea of someone else bearing Finn's child. Maybe this was her way of luring me out, pushing me to run so she wouldn't have to lift a finger. She couldn't stop Finn or the council, so now she's trying to push me out on my own, make me leave. It would be clever, I'll give her that. I clenched the note and forced my thoughts to quiet.
The last thing I needed was hope stirring again. Hope was dangerous. There was no way out of this. I had accepted my fate. I shouldn't complicate things. The night air was chilly, creeping through the thin window panes and curling around my toes despite the fire that still flickered in the hearth. I just finished my dinner, barely more than a piece of bread and meat, and now I sat curled on the small bench near the fireplace, cuddling the book Stella brought me from the library. It wasn't anything special, just something I asked for on a whim, half expecting her to be turned away. The head servant wouldn't normally allow a servant, let alone someone like me, to borrow from the estate's library. But I tried my luck regardless. Stella stood behind me on the raised platform near the bench, humming a soft lullaby as she ran the brush gently through my hair. Her fingers were gentle. I found comfort in it, even if the book didn't offer the same. To my dismay, the pages were dull, filled with dry stories about old wars and bloodlines that no longer mattered. It didn't hold my attention. After a few more paragraphs, I gave up and closed it on my lap. "Do you have a mate, Stella?" I asked, my voice light as I stared at the dim glow of the fire. If I kept reading, I was going to end up with a headache. She paused, the brush mid-stroke. There was hesitation, an awkward silence that stretched a second too long, and that told me the answer. "It's fine," I said quickly, to save her from the discomfort. Not everyone gets to have a fated mate. And it was true. The moon goddess only gave such bonds to the rarest few, the blessed, the ones the stars smiled on. Most wolves just chose their mates, and I never thought there was anything wrong with that. Choosing someone with your heart, your logic, seemed more reliable than waiting for a bond you might never have. Besides,
What if your fated mate turned out to be someone you couldn't even stand, a complete stranger, a brute, someone with no warmth or kindness in them? Would you be expected to stay with them to endure? Because severing a fated bond, that wasn't something easily done. I'd heard whispers about it, but never the details, just that it came with a price. One too steep for most to pay. Maybe it cost a piece of your soul, or your sanity, or your wolf. No one really talked about it. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they just accepted that a blessing could also be a burden.
fated bonds were said to be the strongest in our kind's history, an invisible thread spun by the moon goddess herself tying two souls together. Surely she wouldn't bind someone to a mate who would hurt them. But I wasn't so sure. In my life, I had met very few who found their fated mate. That's how rare it was. Most wolves grew old with partners they chose for themselves. Some were happy, some weren't. Behind me, Stella's voice was quiet.
I dare not ask the moon goddess for a fated mate, Miss Vivian. I tilted my head slightly, listening. I could only hope for a warrior to choose me one day, she continued, so we can lead a humble life. So, there is a warrior, you fancy? The brush stopped. She went still. I could hear the sharp breath she took in, and I could almost feel her panic ripple in the air. I don't have... I smiled to myself, amused by how flustered she became. It was a nice feeling, wasn't it? To like someone, even if it was just a small, quiet sort of affection. I hope your wish comes true, Stella.
I said softly. Truly. There was a pause, then a sigh. I really don't... She mumbled, but gave up halfway through. Her next words were almost a whisper. Yes, I like someone, but I don't think he would ever notice me. My smile faded, because I knew the truth, even if she didn't say it outright. Perhaps they could love another Omega and find happiness, but those of higher status rarely took Omegas as mates. Stella left not long after our quiet conversation. The room dimmed again, the fire no more than dying embers now. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling above. I thought I would fall asleep after that, but the minutes dragged, and sleep didn't come. I shifted onto my side, then onto my back. My mind wouldn't quiet, the room felt heavier the longer I stayed in it. My thoughts kept circling the same pit, fated mates, the bleak future that waited for me, and other things related to it. I couldn't help to wonder if I had a fated mate, but I haven't been so lucky in life, so maybe there was no chance that I was the one of the blessed ones. I'd be fortunate enough if I'd be chosen as someone's mate, but that's impossible to happen here in Levian Pack. No one would want a trader's daughter. Eventually, I pushed back the covers and slipped out. The halls were quiet at this hour, no footsteps, no voices. just the soft, almost inaudible noise under my toes as I made my way through the dim corridor. I passed the servant's wing and slid the side door open just enough to step out into the night. The cold nipped at my arms in the garden. None of the guards would stick so near the manor, so I was out of their sight. I walked slowly down the stone path, breathing in the crisp air, trying to find some peace of... I stopped. A muffled sound reached my ears, a low grunt, then a soft cry that didn't sound like pain, but didn't quite sound like pleasure either. I paused, heart suddenly thudding, and looked toward the far end of the garden where the high wall met the hedges near the old storage shed. A narrow slit of moonlight cut between the leaves. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Through the break in the hedges, I saw him. Finn. He had a maid pinned against the wall, her dress disheveled, one of her legs hooked around his hip. She trembled, her hands clutching at the stone as he moved against her with a fierce, unyielding urgency. There was no tenderness in it, no care. He had one hand fisted tightly in her hair, pulling her head back so her throat was bare. His mouth was at her neck, biting, not kissing. She gasped again, blood trickled down her neck from his harsh bite, but he didn't pause, just kept driving into her like she was nothing but a body, a thing to use. The look in his eyes was what did it. Cold, detached. Like she didn't even matter. I stumbled back from the hedge, bile rising in my throat. I didn't remember how I got back inside, only that my hands were shaking and my vision blurred at the edges. I barely made it to the wash closet down the hall before I dropped to my knees. The retching came fast, violent. My stomach emptied itself into the basin as I clung to the edge. Chapter 10. Who are you? The morning sunlight felt too bright. I sat at the small corner table where I usually took my meals, my hands wrapped around a warm bowl of porridge I hadn't touched. I kept stirring the surface out of habit, watching the pale grains fold into themselves over and over. I didn't have the appetite. I shifted in my seat, forcing myself to look at the food. A bitter taste still lingered at the back of my throat, no matter how many times I rinsed my mouth. I hadn't slept, not really. I must have drifted in and out, but each time I closed my eyes, the images came back. Finn's hand curled in the maid's hair.
The way her back arched against the stone wall, the dull, lifeless look in her eyes, the sound of it all. It rang louder in memory than it had in the garden. I'd assumed Finn was loyal to Esther, that his detachment from other women meant something, that she was the one exception, the only one allowed near his heart while his chosen mate was not yet by his side, and I was just a means to fulfill his duty, the chosen breeder of his heir, but seeing him last night, I realized I was wrong about him. I could tell that for him, love and affection didn't come along with physical intimacy.
And now I couldn't stop wondering what was waiting for me after the airbend rite. Miss Vivian? Stella's voice pulled me back. She was standing nearby, holding a fresh teapot and glancing down at my untouched breakfast. Her expression softened with concern. You haven't eaten a bite. I'm not very hungry, I murmured. She tilted her head, concern furrowing her brow. Are you unwell? I hesitated. I had a nightmare, I said instead, my voice quiet. Didn't sleep well. Her expression softened, the tension in her shoulders loosening. Oh, I see, that happens to me sometimes too. She reached over and gently pushed the bowl closer to me. Would you like something else? Maybe fruit? I shook my head. No, thank you. She didn't press. I'll brew some chamomile tonight, she said, offering a faint smile. It helps me sleep, especially when my thoughts won't stop spinning. That made me smile, just a little. That would be nice, I murmured. Something shocking happened early this morning, she said after a few seconds, lowering her voice slightly, her forehead creasing. One of the maids was found dead. Alice. My heart skipped a beat. Dead? She nodded. They say she died of a sudden illness, collapsed in the servants' quarters last night, and didn't wake again. My fingers tightened around the teacup. Was she young? I asked slowly. Barely older than me, Stella said. I didn't know her well, but I saw her last night before supper. She seemed fine. I felt something shift in my chest, cold and sharp. How did she look like? She took a moment to remember the woman's face properly. Long ginger hair, pale skin, small face, green eyes. She was really beautiful and quiet.
I heard she is supporting her family back home in her village. I didn't hear the rest. My chest went tight. My breath faltered. The face flickered behind my eyes. I saw it again, the woman pressed against stone, mouth parted in a soundless cry. That same small frame trembling under Finn's hands. It was her, the maid from last night. I set my cup down with shaking fingers. My mouth had gone dry. What happened? The question wouldn't stop echoing in my head. Stella kept talking about how the other maids saw Alice as someone very kind, but her voice had already faded into the background.
Some awful thought had pushed its way into my mind, crawled in, and rooted itself before I could stop it. Was she killed? It was too much of a coincidence. I had seen her just last night. I couldn't be mistaken. There weren't many maids who looked like her in this manner, and the memory of her face, twisted in discomfort, caught in that moment with Finn, was still etched too vividly into my mind. Now she was gone. Dead. They said it was illness, but how truthful could that be? The air in my chest felt so tight. Did he kill her? Did Finn end her life so there wouldn't be a trace of his filthy doing? He always seemed so composed, controlled, the perfect alpha, upright and noble, feared but respected. But last night, he hadn't looked composed. He had looked like a man with no restraint, someone who didn't care if he hurt others as long as his need was satisfied. The idea of him cleaning up after himself like someone wiping blood off a blade, was so sickening I could hardly breathe. My hand trembled as I reached for the teacup again, but the smell of it, even the warmth, made the bile rise back to my throat. I pushed the cup away. "You don't seem really well," Stella said gently, her voice cutting through my thoughts. I looked up, and she was watching me now, brow furrowed. "You've gone pale." "I'm fine," I managed, my voice barely holding. "I just need rest. Could I have a moment to myself?" She looked worried, didn't want to leave me alone. But then she nodded and stepped away, her footsteps heading to the door. And then I was alone. I let out a shaky breath. Tears gathered in my eyes before I even felt them. They slipped down my cheeks silently, one after another. I didn't make a sound. Just sat there, bent slightly over the table, gripping the edge like it could hold me together. I was scared, terrified. If Finn could do that to her, if he could take what he wanted and erase her like she never existed, what would stop him from doing the same to me? After I fulfilled my purpose, after I gave him an heir, would I just be discarded, silenced, erased? It made me angry. How could he do that after using the woman? How vile could he be? The thought clung to my ribs like rot. I hadn't even been touched yet, and still I already felt like something inside me was being stripped away. The sun had set without me noticing. The sky had already faded to a deep blue by the time I looked out the window, and the shadows in my room had lengthened into something soft and heavy. I had spent the entire day here, barely moving. Stella brought me lunch sometime in the afternoon. I managed to eat a little, though nothing tasted like anything. She looked at me with gentle eyes, like she could tell something was off, but she didn't ask, and I was grateful for that. I couldn't tell her what I had seen, not when even knowing might put her in danger. That night, just as she said she would, she returned with a cup of chamomile tea. She left it on the side table, and she didn't linger. I stepped out onto the balcony a few minutes later, cradling the warm tea in my hands. The sky was clear, the moon not yet risen, and the stars blinked dimly above the roofline. I sipped slowly, letting the tea sit on my tongue before swallowing. Halfway through the cup, a familiar crow landed on the small table beside me. It carried a rolled paper again. I stared at it for a moment. Then I reached out, gently taking the note from the thin tie in its leg. The crow didn't fly away, just settled there, watching. I unrolled the paper and read the note. "You don't want an escape, so you want to be that bastard's breeder?" My jaw tightened. I hated that it made something stir in my chest, something dangerous. Hope. That fragile, useless thing I'd been trying so hard to silence. I hated that I wanted to believe it. I almost crushed the paper in my fist. Almost threw it over the railing and told the crow to go back to wherever it came from, but I didn't. Instead, I placed the teacup down beside the bird and turned back into the room. I found a scrap of paper about as small as half of my palm and a pen. The ink scratched softly as I wrote, "Who are you?"